Something is broken inside the PGA Tour right now, not because of the rebels, not because of the defectors who chased LIV money. Something far more unsettling than that. The players who stayed loyal are leaving. If that sentence didn't hit you, it will. Think about what that actually means. During the LIV war, the tour leaned on certain players like pillars. These weren't just talented golfers. They were the public face of the tour's survival. They stood in front of cameras, turned down life-changing money, and told the world the PGA Tour was worth fighting for. Their loyalty wasn't passive. It was vocal, visible, and costly. And now those exact players are submitting withdrawal notices from $20 million events. No drama, no statement, no revolt, just silence and an empty tee box where the tour's most valuable names were supposed to be standing. Sources close to multiple player camps are saying the tour's inner circle is more rattled than anything they are putting in their official press releases, because a defection you can fight, a rival league you can outspend. But when the players who publicly declared their loyalty stop showing up, there is no playbook for that. There is no narrative you can manage your way out of. This is not a scheduling disagreement. This is not a contract dispute. What is quietly happening inside this tour right now is something that goes straight to the heart of who actually holds power in professional golf. I think the tour lost that power, and I want to know if you agree. Drop it in the comments. The players walking away are about to be revealed, and when you hear who they are, everything about this crisis will make complete sense. The first public signal that something was badly wrong came at the Cadillac Championship at Trump Doral. $20 million on the table, a marquee venue. The tour's showcase event built specifically to prove that its product was untouchable. 5 of the top 15 players in the world did not show up. 3 of the top 10 in the official world golf ranking were absent. That is not a scheduling conflict. That is not fatigue. 5 of your 15 best players choosing to skip a $20 million event is a statement, even when none of them intended it as one. Sources inside the tour described the mood that week as visibly strained, because the executives running the Cadillac Championship understood exactly what those empty spots communicated to sponsors, to broadcasters, and to every rival organization watching from the outside. The tour had promised its partners the best players together on the same stage every single time. That promise was the entire justification for the signature event model. That promise was what made the purse sizes defensible. Doral proved that promise was built on sand. One sponsor call that week reportedly lasted 40 minutes. The tour representative on that call had no answers, only assurances that meant nothing because everyone on the line already knew the players who skipped faced zero consequences for doing so. Inside the building, a senior official reportedly pulled a colleague aside after reviewing the weekend numbers and said 4 words that nobody wanted to hear. This is getting worse. Not a prediction, a verdict. The ratings told the same story the leaderboard did. When the marquee names disappear, the casual viewers disappear with them. And casual viewers are exactly who the sponsors are paying to reach. The tour was not just losing players that week, it was losing the commercial argument for its own existence. Publicly, the tour said the right things. Privately, the conversations inside those walls were far less measured, because everyone in that building knew the truth that no press release was going to fix. The tour had stripped away the one mechanism that gave it any actual authority over player attendance, the fine system. Gone. Players who skipped signature events once faced real financial consequences, millions of dollars in penalties that made absence genuinely costly. That enforcement mechanism was the tour's teeth. It was the only tool that gave the schedule any binding power over players who had already secured their cards and their earnings. The tour removed it. And the moment it did, the schedule stopped being a requirement and became a suggestion. But here is where the story gets darker, because Doral was just the opening act. The very next week brought another $20 million event, another showcase, another moment the tour needed its biggest names present and visible. The withdrawals kept coming. Tour officials were now looking at back-to-back signature events stripped of the players that justified their existence. Sources with direct knowledge of internal discussions described the conversations that week as urgent in a way that went well beyond the normal frustration of managing a complicated schedule, because the pattern forming across these two events pointed to something structural, something the tour's current leadership had either failed to anticipate or quietly chosen to ignore until it became impossible to look away from. The 2026 spring calendar had been constructed with 5 signature events compressed into 6 consecutive weeks, 5 elite tournaments, 5 $20 million purses, 5 occasions where the tour needed its absolute best players performing at their absolute peak, stacked directly on top of each other with almost no recovery time between them. Think about what that actually demands from a player at the top of professional golf. These are not casual rounds. Every signature event field is reduced, elite, and brutally competitive. The pressure, the travel, the physical and mental output required to compete properly at that level, week after week, is something most people watching from the outside severely underestimate. Players at the very top of the game are not being dramatic when they say consecutive weeks. At that intensity, leave them empty rather than just tired. Tired players compete differently. Empty players cannot compete at all, and entering a major championship in that state is something the best players in the world learned the hard way costs them the tournaments that actually define careers. The tour built a calendar that systematically produces that emptiness. Then it expressed confusion when players started protecting themselves from it. Ryan Lavner on the Golf Channel said something that tour headquarters would have preferred to keep quiet. He called it load management arriving in professional golf. Then he added the line that landed like a warning: "It is only going to get worse." Brian Rolapp, the tour's own commissioner, stood at a microphone and acknowledged that the signature event model has introduced a problem he is still working to resolve. Commissioners do not describe their flagship product as a problem requiring resolution unless the situation has already moved well beyond what normal management can handle. That admission alone should have ended the debate about whether this crisis is real. But what happened inside player circles that same week made the admission look minor. Because while the tour was managing the fallout from 2 consecutive signature events missing major names, something was shifting in how even the most committed tour loyalists were privately talking about their schedules. The conversation was no longer about which events they wanted to play. It was about which events they could afford to play without destroying their preparation for the majors that actually mattered to them. That distinction is everything. When players start filtering the tour's schedule through the lens of major championship preparation, rather than loyalty or obligation, the tour has lost something it cannot recover through purse increases or venue upgrades. It has lost the presumption that its events come first. For 3 years, the tour fought LIV Golf on the argument that its events were where the best players wanted to be. That competitive desire, that history, that belonging, those were the things no rival league could manufacture with guaranteed money. But desire does not survive a calendar that treats players like machines. And belonging does not survive an institution that removes every enforcement mechanism and then acts surprised when players exercise the freedom it accidentally handed them. Sources close to the situation say the players walking away from these events are not angry. They are not making statements. They are simply making rational decisions inside a system that gave them every reason to do exactly that and no reason not to. What happened next is what turned a quiet internal crisis into something the entire golf world could not ignore. 2 players, both loyal, both vocal defenders of this tour when it mattered most, both with histories at specific events that made their absences almost impossible to process for anyone paying close attention. One had never missed this category of event before. Not once across the entire signature event era, his presence had become the one thing tour officials could always point to when critics questioned whether the product was still elite. He was the insurance policy, the name that made every other absence manageable. He withdrew, no injury listed, no statement released, a withdrawal notice, and nothing else. The second player had a relationship with a specific tournament that went beyond professional obligation. He had won there. He loved that course. People inside his circle described that event as one he genuinely looked forward to every single season. He withdrew too, with complete silence, not one word of public explanation offered to anyone. When those 2 withdrawal notices landed, sources described the reaction inside tour leadership as something that crossed from concern into genuine alarm, because these were not players making calculated political moves. These were players making personal decisions, and the tour had absolutely no power, no tool, and no remaining leverage to reverse either one. One tour official speaking privately reportedly described that specific week as the moment the job changed, not the LIV announcements, not the lawsuits, not the merger talks that dominated headlines for 2 years. This week, because everything before had been about external threats the tour could organize against and fight. This was internal. This was the institution's own foundation deciding quietly and without malice that the institution's demands were no longer the priority. There is no enemy to fight when the problem is structural. There is no villain to blame when the players walking away are the ones who stayed loyal through everything. That official has not spoken publicly about it, but sources say the expression on his face that week said everything the press releases were carefully written to avoid. That is what the loss of control actually looks like in practice, not a rebellion, not a press conference. 2 quiet decisions made by 2 players the tour needed most, and an institution left standing with nothing to say and nothing to do about either one. Those 2 players, their names, the real private reason each of them walked away from events they were expected to anchor. That is exactly what you are about to find out. Scottie Scheffler, world number 1, the most dominant player in professional golf, and the closest thing this tour has to an untouchable pillar. He missed the Truist Championship, his first signature event absence since this format began. Sources say Scheffler had been direct with people close to him for months. Playing 3 or 4 consecutive weeks at signature event level leaves him, in his own words, completely whipped by the time the next week arrives. He had already watched what happened in 2024 when he pushed through that feeling heading into a major. He arrived at the U.S. Open emptied out. He paid for it on the leaderboard. He made a private decision that he would never repeat that mistake regardless of what the schedule demanded. The tour had no rule left to challenge that decision, so Scheffler simply acted on it. Viktor Hovland withdrew from the Memorial Tournament, a course where he had won before. A tournament he had publicly spoken about with genuine warmth. People inside Hovland's camp point to something more specific than fatigue. The 5-week compression had left him carrying a physical issue he had been quietly managing for several weeks. Nothing that required a formal medical withdrawal, but enough that competing at Memorial level would have meant competing at 60%. Hovland does not do 60%. Sources say he made the decision 48 hours before the event, after a practice session that told him everything he needed to know. He picked up his bag, told his team, and that was it. No agonizing, no lengthy discussions with tour officials. A clean, private decision made by a player who knew his own body better than any schedule ever could, and who operated inside a system that gave him every right to act on it. Both men are among the most respected and loyal figures this tour has. Neither defected, neither complained publicly, neither made their frustration anyone else's problem. They just stopped showing up, quietly, rationally, completely within their rights, under a rule system the tour itself dismantled. And that is the full picture of what losing control actually means. Not chaos, not revolt. Just 2 of your most loyal players making sensible personal decisions, while the tour stands there with nothing left to stop them. The tour is already planning its response. Starting in 2028, the entire signature event model gets scrapped. 2 tiers, promotion and relegation, 20 events instead of the current bloated calendar. A complete structural rebuild announced 2 years in advance. You do not rebuild from scratch unless you have accepted that what you built cannot be fixed. Scheffler didn't show up. Hovland withdrew without a word. The players who publicly saved this tour during its darkest years are now the ones making its current model look like it is coming apart at the seams. The most loyal ones left first. If you think the players made the right call protecting themselves, type players. If you think the tour deserved more from the people it built around, type tour. Subscribe now, because what comes next in 2028 is a story that starts right here. The tour promised the best players together every single time. It just never asked whether the best players would actually show up.